Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Gopinata, Gopinata Shri Radhe. Jayo Prabhupada, Jayo Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Shri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrind Ki Jai. Samavita Gaur Bhaktivrind Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Jainitai Gaur Premanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Canto 3, Chapter 9, Brahma's Prayers for Creative Energy, text number 3. Natah param paramayad bhavata swarupam. Natah param paramayad bhavata swarupam. Anandamatram avikalpam aviddavarchaha. Anandamatram avikalpam avidyavarchaha Pashyami vishvam srijamekam avishwamatman Pashyami vishvasrijamekam avishwamatman Bhutendriyatmakamadasta upashritosmi Bhutendriyatmakamadasta upashritosmi Nata param paramayad bhavata svarupam Anandamatram avikalpam avidyavarchaha Pashyami vishvasrijamekam avishwamatman Bhutendriyatmakamadasta upashritosmi Nata param paramayad bhavata svarupam Anandamatram avikalpam avidyavarchaha Pashyami vishvasrijamekam avishwamatman Bhutendriyatmakamadasta upashritosmi Nata param paramayad bhavata svarupam Anandamatram avikalpam avidyavarcha Pashyami vishvasrijamekam avishwamatman Bhutendriyatmakamadasta upashritosmi. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. O my Lord, I do not see a form superior to your present form of eternal bliss and knowledge. In your impersonal Brahman effulgence in the spiritual sky, there is no occasional change and no deterioration of internal potency. I surrender unto you because, whereas I am proud of my material body and senses, your Lordship is the cause of the cosmic manifestation, and yet you are untouched by matter. Purport. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 18:55, Bhaktya mam abhijanati yavan yash chasmi tattvataha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead can only be partially known, and only by the process of devotional service to the Lord. Lord Brahma became aware that the Supreme Lord Krishna has many, many eternal blissful forms of knowledge. He has described such expansions of the Supreme Lord, Govinda, in his Brahma Samhita 5.33 as follows. Advaitam achyutam anadim anantarupam adyam purana purusham navayovanam cha vedeshu durlabam adurlabam atma bhakto Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Quote, I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is non-dual and infallible. He is the original cause of all causes, even though he expands in many, many forms. Although he is the oldest personality, he is ever youthful, unaffected by old age. The Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot be known by the academic wisdom of the Vedas. The Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot be known by the academic wisdom of the Vedas. One has to approach the devotee of the Lord to understand him. The only way to understand the Lord as he is by devotional service to the Lord, or by approaching the devotee of the Lord who always has the Lord in his heart. By devotional perfection, one can understand that the impersonal Brahma Jyoti is only a partial representation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, and that the three Purusha expansions in the material creation are his plenary portions. In the spiritual sky of the Brahma Jyoti, there is no change of various kalpas or millenniums, and there are no creative activities in the Vaikuntha worlds. The influence of time is conspicuous by its absence. So this is a verse, what Srila Prabhupada is describing here in the purport, description of Goloka Vrindavan. This is towards the end of the Brahma Samhita, the Shriya Kanta Kanta Parama Purusho, where it's explained that the flute is Krishna's best friend, the water, Toyam Amritam, it tastes just like nectar. Every step is a dance, every word is a song. All the roads are paved with Chintamani. Time is conspicuous by its absence, so that is actually mentioned there. Sravati surabhibhyascha suma mahan. The cows, they give unlimited supplies of milk, and they also fulfill everyone's desires. So all this is nicely explained. Bhaje shweta dvipam tamaham iti golokam itiyam. So in this way, because Golok Vrindavan is so splendorous, wonderful, inconceivably beautiful and attractive, I offer my respectful obeisances to Goloka, also known as Shweta Deep. And I was reading recently in Bhagavatam that glorification of Krishna is bhakti, right? But also anything in relation to Krishna is also equally as good. So if you glorify Krishna's paraphernalia, his flute, his peacock feather, his baraha, vata, right? And then, that's it, right? Baraha vatam. Or if you glorify Krishna's holy abode, if you glorify the dhams like Vrindavan, Mayapur, if you glorify Krishna's pure devotees, all this, because Krishna is absolute, is equally as good as directly worshipping Krishna himself, glorifying Krishna himself. The influence of time is conspicuous by its absence. The rays of the transcendental body of the Lord, the unlimited Brahma Jyoti, are undeterred by the influence of material energy. In the material world also, the initial creator is the Lord himself. He brings about the creation of Brahma, who becomes the subsequent creator empowered by the Lord. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manomishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Vansha Kalpaturubhyasya Kripa Sindhu Bhyavacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So if you observe the workings of this material world, you'll see that it's existing, everything is happening on two principles. One is cause, and the other one is effect. That's why those who are bhakti yogis, we refer to Krishna as sarvakarana karanam. Krishna is the cause of all causes. And you'll see that there's a cause, that cause brings about an effect. In the due course of time, that effect itself becomes a cause for something else to take place. So if you look at karma, karma is basically a practically unlimited, timeless chain of cause and effect. That's what karma is. Now there's a cause, there's a relative cause, and then there's an absolute cause. We can take the absolute cause as being the reason why this whole material world has been created. Now we're discussing Lord Brahma and his prayers, his meditation, and then Krishna revealing to him the spiritual world and how he should go about performing his duty of creation. But previously to this, we read in Srimad Bhagavatam in the last chapter that Brahma descended down the lotus stem which was coming out of the navel of Garbhodakashayi Vishnu. He took on the role to teach us of an empiricist. Those who are treading the path of empiricism, they say that we can only understand and appreciate that which is readily observable and understandable by the senses. But our senses are limited. And that's exactly what Brahma showed us as well. He tried to investigate with his own senses, with his own mind, by climbing down the lotus stem to try to understand how big is this universe, where did it come from, how was it created. But as he climbed down, he didn't know when he would come to the bottom. And so he climbed back up and he sat on top of his lotus seat again. And then he started his meditation. Now, the difference between the empiricists, or let's say, even we can say atheistic people, versus those who are spiritual, those who are, like, when I say spiritual, I mean genuinely spiritual, like bhakti yogis, those who are Krishna conscious, or even those who are religious, is that both of them, the religious and the spiritual, as well as the atheistic and the scientific, both of these parties, they believe in cause and effect. But there's one fundamental difference. The empiricists, or the scientists, they say that the original cause for the creation of this entire universe came about by chance. They can't attribute a reason as to the original cause. And the spiritualists, those who are Krishna conscious, those who are bhakti yogis, or those who are religious, they give a reason for the original cause. They say that God created it for a certain reason. And different religions may give different depth of reasons as to why God created this universe. We understand from our study of Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita that Krishna has created this material world for the jivas to enjoy separately from Krishna so that they can fulfill their desire. And the ultimate reason for this whole material universe to exist is to teach us, the conditioned souls, that actually this is not our home and we should be endeavoring to go back to the spiritual world. But if you look at the empiricists, if you say that the original cause for this creation of this universe actually came about by chance, so if you say that the original cause came about by chance, then the effect also came about by chance. And as I mentioned, over a period of time, the effect then becomes another cause. And then the cause again brings about an effect. The effect in time becomes a cause for something else, for another effect. And like that, the cause and effect continues. Therefore, if you say that the original cause came about spontaneously or by chance, then every subsequent chain of cause and effects after that also comes about by chance as well. We have jobs, we have families, we're wearing certain clothes, we look a certain way. Everything, all these cause and effects come about ultimately by chance because the original cause came about by chance. Whereas if you look at the spiritual people, the religious people, and there is a distinction between the two, but I'm grouping them together, they said that the original cause came about for a reason, not by chance. Therefore, all the causes and effects after that have a reason. And as I mentioned, the reason is that we want to enjoy separately from Krishna, so we're allowed that opportunity, but ultimately it's self-realization. To understand who we are, to understand our relationship with Krishna, and escape this bondage of karma, of repeated birth and death, and go back to the spiritual world. That's the whole reason why this mature world exists. It exists for that educational purpose. Now, sometimes Brahma is known as, not sometimes, Brahma is known as Swayambhu. Does anyone know what Swayambhu means? Self-born, right? Sometimes Brahma is also referred to as self-enlightened as well. So Brahma is self-born, he is self-enlightened. We have to understand this word self. Self doesn't mean that Brahma was born from his self. Self doesn't mean, when we say Brahma is self-realized, it doesn't mean that Brahma himself is the cause of his spiritual realization. In one sense, we can say that Brahma is self-born and is self-realized because he doesn't depend on any other jiva for his birth. He doesn't depend on any other jiva for his knowledge to be realized, to be manifested to him. Whereas we depend. We depend on our parents to take birth. We depend on our teachers, on our gurus, on our instructors, on our mentors, on our professors to be educated. So our knowledge is dependent on other jivas and our birth is dependent on other jivas. So in that context, Brahma is self-born, Brahma is self-realized as well. But ultimately, Srimad Bhagavatam explains that Krishna, especially, I think it's at the beginning of the 10th canto or right at the end of the 9th canto, Shukadeva Goswami is explaining that Krishna is the self of the self. Right? In that analysis where we're understanding that the body is dear to us because the soul is inside, right? And then the soul is dear to us because Krishna is the self of the self. That analysis is given in Srimad Bhagavatam. So if we look at it from that context, that the ultimate real self is Krishna. He's the self with the capital S. Whereas we are the self with the small s, coming from the self with the big S. So if you look at it from that context, when we say Brahma is Swayambhu, self-born. He is born from someone, he's born from the self with the capital S. When we say Brahma is self-realized, yes, he is realized because he got his knowledge from the supreme self, the self with the capital S. So in that way, Brahma is not independent in attaining his knowledge. We have been talking in the past several weeks about different ways of attaining knowledge. Right? We talked about the 10 different ways which Vedavyas lays down to us. Credible ways for us to attain knowledge. Through our senses, pratyaksha praman, through inference, or mental speculation, that's known as anuman, through shabda, obviously. We gave different examples as well, like upaman, understanding something through the use of analogy, abhava, or understanding something by negative cognition, like that. There's 10 different ways that we covered. If we don't take knowledge from Krishna, if we don't take knowledge from a supreme authority, then we can only depend on two things to acquire knowledge. One is our senses, and the other one is our mind. That is the only way in which we can make sense of anything around us. Our senses, our material senses, our gyanendriyas as well as our karmendriyas, and through mental speculation. But as Srila Prabhupada mentions, imperfect senses are one of the 4 defects of conditioned souls. So having imperfect senses and an imperfect mind which is impure leads to at least 2 different types of defects. If you rely simply on getting knowledge through your senses and your mind, the only truth you will realize is relative truth. You will not realize absolute truth. I'll give an example. If I touch something which is hot, right? If I touch a hot surface, then immediately I'll go, wow, that's hot. To myself, I will conclude that this object is hot. But if someone else, let's say a chef who's working in the kitchen day in, day out, if he touches that same object, then for him or her, it may not be hot. So what is hot for me may not be hot for someone else. It shows that if you just rely on your own senses, yes, it is hot for you. That's the truth for you. But it may not be truthful for someone else. Therefore, the truth which you have gotten by using your senses is relative. It is not absolute. Secondly, if you rely simply on obtaining knowledge through your senses and through your mind, you always have to compare the knowledge you get with some other standard. That can be an object or it can be another person. Again, I'll give you two examples. Let's say if it's a hot day. It's sunny outside, I'm starting to sweat, and I say to myself through mental speculation and through the tactile sense, because the sun is hitting against my skin, so I'm feeling the heat of the sun, and I mentally speculate using my mind and my senses. I say, today it must be 35 degrees. Now the only way I can ascertain that is by actually taking the help of something else, like a thermometer. I look at a thermometer and the thermometer says, yes, indeed, it is 35. Or in fact, it's 40, or maybe it might be a little bit less. So we have to use the help of something else to assist our knowledge that we get from our mind and our senses. Another example, if I'm with a group of friends, and let's say I want to be the chief of the party, and I act in a really jovial way, I crack jokes with people, and people are laughing, and they're getting along with me nicely. The conclusion that I come up with is that, I'm a pretty popular person, I'm a pretty easygoing person, and people have a good, what is the word? People have a good understanding of me. They perceive me in that way. But unless I ask the other person, what do you think of me? Then I can't actually understand what they think of me. So what I'm trying to say is that if we just rely on our mind and our senses, we won't get the real knowledge. We have to depend on someone else. And ultimately we have to depend on Krishna. Like yesterday, actually just before the lockdown started, I was going on book distribution, and at the end of the day, we dropped by to get some bhoga from Woolworths. So in the car park, I met an old friend of mine from high school. And I recognized him. He still looked exactly the same. And he's now a doctor. But he's a very philosophical type of a person. He's like a scientist. And I remember in in high school, every morning, we would come together, me and him and another few students, some of our friends, and we would have a meeting in the morning before the morning assembly. As you probably know, the morning assembly bell rings at 9 o'clock and the whole school comes and they gather together for the morning announcements. So before that, for the last 20 minutes or so before the bell rings, we would gather together in the library and we would discuss and speculate. Actually, he would do it, but I was interested in that, so I would just listen to him. And we would speculate about really amazing far-out things. Like, I remember we would speculate about quantum physics and quantum mechanics. Like, for example, something is solid because of the arrangement of the atoms, right? So quantum mechanics means that you can manipulate the arrangement and the structure of the atoms. So we would speculate that if you have a door which is solid, then we may be able to invent some sort of quantum technology in the future, whereby through the click of a button, through the press of a button, we'll be able to change that door, which is a solid, into liquid or into gas. And then the person would be able to pass through the door and then click the button again, and that door, which is now liquid in nature or gas in nature, would turn back into a solid. Or we would speculate about the speed of light. Right now we're seeing everything because we're slower than the speed of light. But what would reality be like if we traveled faster than the speed of light? What type of shape would physical objects take? How would we experience things with our senses? Like that we would speculate. And it was really fun, but ultimately it's just speculation. It's not ultimate knowledge. There's nothing conclusive. So therefore it's useless. But this is what we do. So I met him, and then I explained to him that I'm a monk now, and I'm practicing Krishna consciousness. I live in a temple. And he was fascinated. So he sent me an email saying, look, this is a really nice YouTube video that I found. It's a conversation between a Buddhist philosopher and a physicist, and they're discussing about the nature of consciousness, and they're discussing about the nature of reality, ultimate reality. So I sent him some videos back from our Happy Jiva channel about us discussing about consciousness based on the Bhagavad Gita and other Bhakti Yoga texts. And he surprised me with his answer. He said that, yes, as soon as I met you, you'd given me that card, that Happy Jiva card, so I went back home and I watched these videos with my wife straight away. And they're really fascinating videos, really nice. You presented it really nicely. But you concede, he said, you concede that there is some way in which we can understand the ultimate reality. And you propose that this way is through meditation and through introspection. Of course, he didn't know that we chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. He understood that we do some sort of meditation. So he said, you concede that through meditation and introspection, you can understand the absolute reality. But his question to me was, how do you know that the realization that you get through meditation is not just another illusion? How can you be sure that it's not just another illusion? Whatever knowledge and realizations that you get through meditation. So I wrote back to him and I told him, and he actually mentioned, how do I know? I'm not saying that it is illusory, he said, but how do I know when to trust the senses and when not to trust the senses? So I wrote back to him, telling him that yes, you're right, our senses are imperfect. For example, we can't see with our eyes all the frequencies of the electromagnetic spectrum. If we touch something which is extremely hot with our skin, then for a few seconds it feels very cold, it feels ice cold. So our senses are limited. And therefore it goes that whatever instrumentation we construct or build with our imperfect senses also have imperfections inherently within themselves and in our ability to understand the results that such instruments give. So we should not place exclusive trust and faith in our senses alone. Then I told him, but trust and faith has to be placed in something. For example, even those who are treading the path of empiricism, like scientists, they also place their trust in something. And I gave him the simple example of the scientific journal, where a scientist, when he's reading a scientific journal, an accredited scientific journal, he places his trust in the experiments and the results that other scientists have achieved when they perform their experiments at some other point in history. He's placing his trust in these results because he places his trust and his faith in the scientific journal. He wasn't there himself when these experiments were conducted by these other scientists. He didn't experience with his own senses and his own mind the results of these experiments. But he places his trust in the accredited science journal. So similarly, I was telling him, we need to place our trust in something sublime. Simultaneously, we also need a process by which we can realize with our senses this knowledge that we're trying to follow or trying to understand. And I explained to him that there is a difference between empirical science or material science and spiritual science. Both are science. But in Krishna consciousness, the laboratory is not your science bench with test tubes and Bunsen burners and pipettes and all these things. Your laboratory is your own consciousness. And your state of consciousness and the changes in your consciousness. Like Srimad Bhagavatam gives the example of tushti pushti, kshud apaya. When you eat food, you feel satisfaction. You can't explain that satisfaction you feel in a completely perfect way to someone else. It's something that you feel. So that's an example which Srimad Bhagavatam gives, and that's something we can apply as an example to us as well. When we practice Krishna consciousness, we feel in our consciousness the difference, the changes which are taking place. So I told him that because his understanding was through meditation and through introspection, different people get different realizations. Someone may come to a certain conclusion, I may come to a different conclusion, therefore it's all subjective. He was explaining. He was thinking like that. But I explained to him that the reason why Krishna consciousness is scientific is because the hypothesis, the procedure, and the results have already been predefined by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. The hypothesis Krishna gives, Dehinosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yovanam jara, na jayate mriyate vakadachin, dehi nityo vadyoyam dehe sarvasya bharata. All this is explained by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. You are the soul. You are related to me. You have an intrinsic relationship with me, which is eternal. Krishna also outlines the scientific procedure. That is explained in today's verse. Srila Prabhupada is quoting Bhagavad Gita 18:55, and I'll just read it out. Bhaktya mam abhijanati yavan yashchashmi tatvata tato mam tatvato jnatva vishate tad anantaram. So this is the 18th chapter, verse 55. And here is the experimental procedure. One can understand me as I am, as the Supreme Personality Godhead, only by devotional service. Krishna outlines how devotional service should also be performed. Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyajimam namaskuru. Satatam kirtayanto mam. So he's giving the experimental scientific procedure. And Krishna gives us the result. What does he say? And when one is in full consciousness of me by such devotion, he can enter into the kingdom of God. He also says, don't be fearful. I will take away all your sinful reactions. I'll eliminate your karma. You'll become pure in consciousness. You'll be able to control your mind, fix your mind. You'll reach the super soul. All these results of the process of Krishna consciousness have been predefined by Krishna and by Guru. Therefore, because they have been predefined, when we practice mantra meditation, it is expected that we will get these predefined results, and that our results of meditation will not be subjective and therefore will not be illusory. So that was my answer to his question or to his doubt. So I'm waiting for his response. I just wanted to finish today's class by just going through the last few verses of the Brahma Samhita. Because last week we were talking about the context from which Brahma Samhita was originally spoken by Brahma, about his confusion and then his meditation, why he came about glorifying Krishna in the famous Govindam Adi Purusham prayers. So this time, today, I want to explain to you what the Supreme Personality of Godhead imparted onto Brahma after Brahma finished with his Brahma Samhita prayers. So, this is text 57 of Brahma Samhita, and the translation is, on hearing these hymns containing the essence of the truth, the Supreme Lord Krishna said to Brahma, so Krishna has heard with attention these prayers which have been offered by Brahma to him, and Krishna is telling him, Brahma, if you experience the inclination to create offspring by being endowed with the real knowledge of the glory of Godhead, then listen, my beloved, from me to this science set forth in the following 5 shlokas. So I was explaining in Bhagavatam, Brahma is enlightened in the 4 shlokas of the Bhagavatam. Now Krishna will tell him 5 shlokas, which will assist Brahma in his duty, in his responsibility of generating progeny in this universe. And we're reading in this section of Bhagavatam as well, Srila Prabhupada is explaining that Brahma has that inherent desire within himself to create this, to create different things in this universe, to be the secondary creator. And last week we were explaining from the Brahma Samhita that the reason why Brahma has that desire is because of the consciousness that that jiva created in the previous kalpa. So we're explaining that we have certain mental makeups, certain personalities, because of how we conditioned our mind through our activities in our previous lifetime. That's why everyone's an individual. Some people are aggressive, some people are peaceful, some people are exuberant and extroverts, some people are more introverted. That's because of how we condition our mind in our previous life or in our previous lives. So, now, Krishna will impart these 5 shlokas. The first one, Krishna says to Brahma, when the pure spiritual experience is excited by means of cognition and service, then one's love of Godhead is awakened towards Krishna. So what is he saying? He's saying that when you get the inclination to practice spiritual life, that has to be assisted with cognition and service. And this is defined as bhakti. Bhakti means it's a spiritual experience, but it has to be assisted with transcendental knowledge, cognition, as well as service, devotional service. So Krishna is encouraging and inspiring Brahma that Brahma, now you've gotten the vision of Golok Vrindavan, you've understood the nature of reality, continue acquiring spiritual knowledge, meditating on spiritual knowledge. Krishna tells Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita that one should study this literature by means of his intelligence. We have to use our intelligence in bhakti. We should not be lazy to use our intelligence. Of course, Krishna does say, or Bhagavatam does say elsewhere, Srila Prabhupada also mentions that for those who are unable to read for a genuine reason, then Krishna still gives them knowledge as the super soul within their heart. So there is some consolation. But we should not depend on that. We should follow the path which is given by Krishna, which is to acquire transcendental knowledge from devotees who have understood the truth, who are seers of the truth, as mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. Na sato vidyate bhava, na bhavo vidyate sata, ubayar vidrishrantas tvanyas tattvadarshibi. We have to approach those who are tattvadarshibi, who have fully realized the truth. And from them, we should understand knowledge. So this is what Brahma is saying. Krishna is telling Brahma. Then he says, the highest devotion is attained by slow degrees by the method of constant endeavor. So Srila Prabhupada mentions in this verse, Bhakti Amam Vijananti, if you read the purport Srila Prabhupada is given in the Bhagavad Gita, he explains that bhakti is a slow process. I remember when Sucharu Prabhu, he was once giving a Srimad Bhagavatam class, he explained to us the Vedic process of marriage. He explained that in the Vedic times, and maybe even just, I don't know, maybe 80, 100 years ago, maybe 50 years ago, I don't know. But in the Vedic culture in India, that girls would be married as early as the age of 8 or 9, and boys would be married by the time they were 15 or 16 years of age. Now, it's not that because they were married at such a young age, it's not that they would live together as husband and wife. The girl would still live with her parents, and the boy would also live with his parents. But the reason why they were married at such an early age is through time and through constant endeavor, the slow process, they would develop a loving bond between themselves which was so unbreakable and unshakable that in the Vedic culture, divorce or anything like that was unheard of. So I remember Sucharapa was explaining that the parents of the girl would take her to the house of her husband and she would cook some food. the little girl would cook some food and she would give this food to her husband. And in return, her young husband, the 15 or 16-year-old boy, he would reciprocate with his wife by giving her some gifts. And in this way, they would develop a loving bond. Bhakti is exactly the same principle. It works on exactly the same principle. It's slow because where the soul, the conditioned soul, is again learning to reestablish faith and love in Krishna, something which it has forgotten for countless lifetimes. That's why Srila Prabhupada mentions it's a slow process, but it's an unfailing process. That's why Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita that once having come back to the spiritual world, you won't again come back to this material world. Because that relationship, that love then is unshakable and unbreakable. So then he continues on. This is a nice verse. Abandoning all meritorious performances, serve me with faith. The realization will correspond to the nature of one's faith. So that's interesting. What it means is that the type or the degree of faith that we develop in Krishna through our sadhana, through our service, that's the degree of realization that we'll have of Krishna. And in the purport, it's mentioned that faith starts with Shraddha. Shraddha is faith. And then faith matures to sadhu sangha, bhajana kriya, right? Anartha nivriti, nishtha ruchi asakti bhava, and finally prema. All these different processes, these 9 processes of bhakti, are simply intensifying degrees of faith. So one who is on the platform of nishtha, he has a greater realization given to him by Krishna than someone who's on the path of, or on the stage of anartha nivriti. So therefore, as devotees, we should endeavor to advance in Krishna consciousness and not stay on the same platform. Because by advancing in Krishna consciousness, Krishna will give us greater and greater realizations. As Srila Prabhupada has mentioned in today's purport, that the Supreme Personality of Godhead can be partially known and only by the process of devotional service. So the partiality to which we can understand Krishna increases the more we advance in bhakti. The closer and closer we get to Krishna prema, the more and more we can understand Krishna. 2 more, and then we'll finish. Or I think maybe 1 more. Oh, that's 1 more, okay. Listen, O Vidhi, Brahma, I am the seed, the fundamental principle of this world, animate and inanimate. I am Pradhan, I am Prakriti, I am Purusha. This fiery energy that belongs specially to the Brahman that inheres in you has also been conferred by me. It is by bearing this fiery energy that you regulate this phenomenal world of animate and inanimate objects. Krishna is telling him, Brahma, not to be bewildered by the false ego and to always understand that whatever you're doing in this world, that facility and ability is given by Krishna. Pasvan yatashma sakaleshu nijeshu teju sviyam kiyat prakatiti apitadvaratra. Brahmayesha jagadanda vidana karta govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. Brahma is the karta. He is the doer of this mature world. But his doing depends on the empowerment of Krishna. So, because Brahma has been empowered in such a way, we see that he's not actually being bewildered by pride or anything like that. We see that our Brahma is a devotee, and in this very special chapter, Brahma is offering his prayers to Lord Krishna so that he can create this different forms and different objects, life forms in the secondary creation of the universe. So to carry out his service is depending on Krishna, and he's begging Krishna for help. The Acharyas explained, my Guru Maharaj was mentioning in a lecture recently, that for us to overcome offenses to the holy name of Krishna, 2 qualities we must have. First is, we must have the quality of being contrite. I think that was the word, contrite. Contrite is a word which is no longer in heavy usage. in today's day and age. Contrite means that you have to have a very lowly, humble attitude, considering yourself completely insignificant and unworthy. When we have that attitude, that very humble attitude that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explains, Trinadapi Sunichena, then Krishna's mercy, his Kripa Shakti will flow. Whereas nowadays we're taught to be proud, have high self-esteem, but bhakti yogis show their self-esteem in their dependence on Krishna. Secondly, the acharyas explain, one needs to be chanting constantly. So these two qualities. A feeling of contriteness and worthlessness and uselessness, but it's not in the mode of ignorance. Someone materially who is depressed won't chant, won't go to work, won't do any activities, nothing like that. They'll just sit at home and just be depressed. But in Krishna consciousness, that feeling of humility is assisted by an intensification of our service. So the devotee increases the quality and quantity of his or her chanting, and the devotee chants constantly the holy name of Krishna. And in this way, the devotee advances through the empowerment of Krishna. So we'll finish here. Thank you very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.